Hello, hello. We are live here on LinkedIn and testing going live to YouTube at the same time. For those of you watching live, I'm Beth Granger, or for those of you watching replay, who am I kidding? I'm still the same person. Beth Granger here. I'm a LinkedIn trainer, coach, and speaker. And just some housekeeping before I introduce you to my amazing guest, because I am seeing comments on the phone. How about give me some comments? If you are here, let us know where you're calling in, watching in from, and share so that other people can join us. My guest today, Jill, thank you so much. Jill Schiefelbein is here. She is I'm going to read this so I get it right. Jill is a communication strategist who helps clients get their target audiences to make faster decisions. Don't we all want that? She's a former business communication professor. She's a keynote speaker and author. And besides that, she's the person who introduced me to National Speakers Association and the place with the very best tater tots on the Upper East Side of New York City. Jill, welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Let's be honest, if not all of New York City.
Well, I haven't tried them really that many other places, so I might have to do a little survey.
You know, testing tots for humanity or something like that. You know, tater tots, not children.
We'll do a hashtag. And if you see me looking down, it's because I'm checking out comments. And if you're watching on replay, try to tag me or Jill in the comment, because LinkedIn doesn't always seem to give me a notification that there are comments after the fact. All right. So Jill, you hear communication strategist, and that can be so incredibly broad. It's kind of like when you hear coach. What does that mean? Mm-hmm. When people describe you as a communication strategist or you describe yourself, what do you mean by that?
So I think all of us know, like, if you're a professional person in this world, and even if you're not, you're just a relational person in this world, communication is essential. It's ubiquitous. We don't exist without it, right? Things don't happen. Change doesn't progress without communication, either internally or externally to other people. And what I find in this space of thought leaders, of experts, of people in business, of executives is there's tons of people that claim I have great communication skills. And there's a lot of people that claim communication expertise. And a lot of them have it. And a lot of them have hands-on experience. What I found through working with my clients that was unique was not just the hands-on experience, what's worked in an organization. It's also, what are the theoretical underpinnings of it? What are the repercussions when communication goes wrong? How can we zoom out at a systemic level and analyze and understand communication so that it's not just in the moment that our words are making sense, but that those words stick with people long after we're gone?
Wow. Yeah. And I mean, that applies, like you said, everywhere. That applies to internal communication, right? How do people engage with each other within an organization, and then also communicating externally about yourself, the business, whatever it might be.
Sure. And I think, there's a lot of stuff out there, a lot of books, a lot of articles, a lot of lists and things written about communication. And one of my, soapbox style pet peeves, if you will, is when someone will go to an organization or to a group of people, or you're in counseling, even, for example, on a relational level, and it's like, okay, you need to communicate these 5 specific things in this specific order, and this is the result you'll get. And it's complete BS. Yes, it can work well if all the situational and contextual factors are right, but giving someone a bulleted list or a script and saying this is how you need to communicate in a situation is not moving the needle in terms of getting results, getting decisions as fast as you may want. And it's because every human in every situation is different. So I became obsessed with zooming out of this like theoretical checklist that, of course, as a former academic, you have these shoved on you all the time. And then in organizations, if you're being trained, you also have these frameworks shoved on you all the time. But I became obsessed with zooming out on that and seeing, what are the conditions that need to be present in order for these frameworks to be successful? And if those conditions are not present, how can you communicate to manufacture the correct conditions? And that's where a lot of combinations of psychology, neuroscience, behavioral science, all of those things wind together, combined with those communication checklists, those theories, the strategies. And it's only in that combination do I find things to be truly impactful and moving the needle in a big way.
So is there, before you start working with a person or a group of people, do you do some kind of an assessment, or how do you, because there's so much going on behind the scenes, right? Every individual, we can all go to hear the same thing, or someone says the same thing, and we all hear it differently. So how do you start?
How do you start? An in-depth needs assessment is the way to start. And I know a lot of people do needs assessments, right? That's not a new thing, but it's really making sure that that needs assessment, again, a lot of the times you go in and you have this input form, right? So you have a client intake form, there's a checklist of all these things that need to be answered. The most skilled and strategic consultants may have that list, but they probably don't even utilize 50% of it once they get down into the conversation and understanding where the needs and pain points really are. And in the same vein, a lot of people I know, and this is service providers of all types, right? Whether it's, a professional speaker and consultant, trainer, or whether it's a moving company, right? Like I just had a moving company come in and give me an estimate this morning. And the way that they present the options is going to be different on every person. And the skilled leader, the skilled salesperson, the skilled marketer is going to understand the fears, the hesitations, and the uncertainties that someone else is having in the moment and be able to present their options according to alleviating those uncertainties first before moving forward with a plan of action.
Wow. Now, I imagine that requires allowing the person to make those judgments on the spot and adjust, right? Some organizations want people to go by a script, and here's what you do, so that requires trust of your people.
A huge amount of trust of your people. And to me, it's a huge amount of giving them agency during your internal training processes, right? So, whether you're an entrepreneur and you're a team of one and using this framework, or you're trying to train a group of people who are going to be interfacing with your clients and your clientele and potential customers, it's really about giving them a framework. And then in the training is not just about the framework, because most people who get into a position at a certain level are competent enough to read a piece of information and a framework. What they're not always competent enough to do, simply because in our society we have not been trained repeatedly to do it, is to personalize that script, to personalize the approach, to have leeway from our employers, our bosses, to own it in our own unique way. And what I often find happens in companies, I was just working with a sales team in Toronto last week, and the beautiful thing about this team and their leader was they actually give the teams complete autonomy over their budget within a certain realm, what events they spend it on, how they decide to sponsor events or not sponsor events. When they're out, do they display or do they just go do the networking, and how they approach it. They're not kind of regimented into, you must use this slide deck and you must use these talking points and you must hand out these brochures. They actually give all their people agency to do it. And it was one of the most fascinating sales teams that I've ever worked with, simply because during the presentation on the neuroscience of decision making, every person had such unique questions based on their own unique approach. And this is why this company year over year for the past 3 years has grown exponentially. It's because they instilled trust in their people. And it's a hard thing to do as a business owner. I've just made my first hires this year on, an official basis, not like hey, here's a contractor and there's a contractor. And it's terrifying. I understand that. But what I can tell you is when people feel they have agency and control over the process and they're able to reduce uncertainty on their own, their brain is able to process cognitive functioning faster than if they're stuck with that uncertainty and you're not able to provide the resources or the directives to help.
That's fascinating. I am going to interrupt because just
Sure.
to say that the comments weren't showing, but now they are. So let me quickly see. Oh, we have someone from Germany, and hey, Tom from Long Island, and Frank from Grand Central, and Mitchell and Steve, and all sorts of people. Thanks for joining us. Someone saying their comment came up twice. And Brenda, well, thank you, everybody. If you're just joining us, we're live on LinkedIn and YouTube as an experiment. And I'm here with Jill, who's a communication strategist. And we were initially talking about what does that mean? Because that can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, which ties into what we were just talking about, that people hear something and hear it in very different ways. So, not to get us distracted, where were we? Let's get back to our conversation. And if you have people who are joining us, if you have questions or comments, please share them and share this out so that other people can join us.
So can I actually jump in, Beth? Because I think something you said really triggered a thought.
Yes.
So a lot of the work that I do now is having companies, groups, teams, whether it's leaders or sales, marketing, et cetera, really analyze all their communicative touch points. So I call it a communication touch point audit, and going through that and really understanding where in those touch points is there room for uncertainty. Now, uncertainty is the thing that holds us back from making decisions, right? We all have a different level of tolerance of risk, of uncertainty, et cetera. But what happens is when we are uncertain about something, our brain fills in the gaps automatically because our brains are wired for survival. Like that's its job. Like keep this alive, regulate all the systems, do the things. But when you're looking at it from kind of a communicative standpoint, what the brain is doing is it's filling in any gaps that it doesn't have data points for. So let me give you an example. Have you ever interacted with someone only via email, right? You see their name, you see their title, you chose not to look them up on LinkedIn for whatever reason. I know that's rare now, but think about even 5-10 years ago, right? When it was a very different technological place. You'd get emails from people, you communicate back and forth. And through that communication, in your mind, you are starting to get a picture of what this person might look like, what they might sound like, how tall they might be, how they might dress. Our brain starts to fill in the gaps from our uncertainties. And then you pick up the phone and you talk to the person the first time and their voice is like nothing like you expected it to be, right? Or you meet them in person and you're like, wow, Tom Cruise, I thought you were going to be like 6'3" and you are shorter than I am. That type of thing. Our brains fill in the gaps when we're uncertain. So the most effective organizations, sales teams, marketing teams, et cetera, are the ones who are able to strategically look at the gaps and figure out how people may be filling in those uncertainties on their own, and then circumvent that by creating messaging strategy around targeting those uncertainties. And as a strategist, that's where I come in.
I love it. And it's funny because I had that exact thing happen to me. You know, I develop a lot of relationships, say on Twitter or online, where maybe I've seen a picture, and I forget who it was, but there was someone, I knew they lived in the UK, but until I spoke to them, it just didn't register that they would sound like they were from the UK. So that's pretty funny. So tell me more about this, the filling in the gaps. So how do you even know where those gaps are, or where do you begin?
Yeah, the first step is to really, as I said earlier, doing that communication touch point audit, but where that comes from, and I'm going to like rewind with the story here about how I became fascinated in communication from a systems perspective. So Bert Lanfey is a systems theorist back in the mid 1900s. So let me be a good former academic and give my citation there. But in really understanding what systems thinking means in organizations, it's really showing and thinking strategically through how one input or impact on an organization impacts other areas, how things are interdependent, but then also how things can kind of self-maintain and get back in fluidity. And one of the projects that I had the opportunity to work on when I was in the academic space was actually partnering with West Point. And we got access to translated documents obtained from a terrorist camp raid in Afghanistan. And this was in, like 2005, 2006. And I'm sitting there and a professor that I'm working with says, hey, I want you to run this through our text resonance analysis software. He goes, but this is not just a quantitative thing. Boom, here's 200 pages of these translated documents. I need you to go through and try to decipher how communication is flowing inside and outside of this system. And so it was really for me by going down and looking at the system as a whole, gathering all the available data that I had, and then trying to sketch out how is information flowing from point A to point B? Who are the carriers of that information and that message? Are there physical touch points that obviously the military could use in some way? Are there mental touch points or really kind of cogs in the wheel that could be attacked strategically with counter narratives, that type of thing, and then report back on that? And what we found is systematically, internally, there were wheels and hubs of communication, and breaking a spoke in that can disrupt the whole balance of the wheel. Externally, there were 3 different facets to that messaging and communication strategy, all targeting different aspects of one's mental awareness or capacity in a situation. And it was through looking at all of that that I then realized these checklists, here's 5 things you need to do in every sales conversation are not going to work because every system is very, very different. And the inputs, the variables, not only just the people, but the messages, the marketing strategies, the reviews of you online that you don't know, that you're not even aware of because you haven't read yet, the experiences that someone else has had with someone in your industry that is not you, all of that comes into play with how their mind is mentally positioned and situated before you even open your mouth for the first time. And so in order to identify these gaps, it's really looking at it systemically and reverse engineering the process of how information is flowing in and out of your system to and from your target audience, your client or your employee.
Wow. Who knew, right? Everybody's joining us. Who knew we'd be talking about that kind of, communication? And, sometimes we think about things that are way less important and, we're talking about selling a pen. So, yeah.
But I mean, even in that though, they do. And even in selling a pen, right? Like we can joke and be sarcastic about it, like a beautiful pen, Beth. Let's talk about that pen. What size of millimeter point does it have? I mean, we go into all these details, but what really happens is, and what the military intelligence team had worked with us as a research team to do was, listen, we can break it down and see these bullet points. We need you as experts in this systemic thinking and this communication strategy to show us what we're missing outside of these bullet points. But what happens so much in organization is all your communication is based on bullets. Businesses aren't built on bullets. They're not at all. And every time I see these presentations and salespeople going to give these presentations at networking events, as when you're sponsoring an event, you're paying thousands of dollars to be at a trade show, a travel show, whatever it may be, and all you're doing is communicating information that anyone could find online on their own, you're really missing the mark because you're not targeting a single uncertainty gap by communicating things in bullet points. If anything, you're actually expanding the number of uncertainty gaps that exist.
Yeah. I mean, right? We can find anything online for the most part. So
anything.
So to discover these gaps, I imagine you have to look at both what people inside the organization know, but do you also have to go outside and ask people?
Yes and no, depending on the situation. In a perfect world, of course, right? We'd get as many data points as we can and, conglomerate them and make assumptions and predictions based on that. What you really need to do, and what I find that organizations of all types are pretty horrific at, and I'm not pointing fingers at any particular role. I'm saying we all get so caught up in our day-to-day lives that we actually forget to collect organizational knowledge. So a team I worked with a few weeks ago, the whole point of the focus groups that I ran with their teams was in order to collect all the organizational knowledge around selling a certain high value product. So this product's about a $30,000, $40,000 product. They're trying to sell this. Obviously, that's not an easy sell for the average person, right? That's not something most of us can do. It's just like, yeah, here's 30 grand, let me have it. And it's for a non-necessity. It's for an experience. It's not even for a product, right? Yeah. And so when you're looking at something like that, there's a team of 10 people who are tasked with doing these sales. And once they have sold it, monitoring them through the process up until they take this experience. And there's a million questions that they get asked, but there's never a collection point.
Yes.
for that information and for that knowledge. So I worked with them using their existing CRM and sales software to be able to input custom fields so that they on a regular basis are collecting these bits of knowledge and information that they can then go up to an organizational knowledge level, which allows people to fill in those gaps a little easier. And a lot of times, again, we communicate on information. We want to just kind of vomit our passion out on everyone, right? If I'm very passionate about selling pens, right? Since you held that up, this is what we're going to play with, right? So Beth, I have to tell you all about this pen. It has a 0.5 millimeter tip, which is not the finest out there, but you'll see the ink, the way this sustainably sourced ink rolls off the tip of this ballpoint pen, and the ergonomic design that you hold in your hand, right? All these different things that we're like so passionate about, all these features that we've memorized, we just like, passion vomit it out over people. The reality is, if I say, Beth, I want you to imagine that you are about to sign a document on the biggest business contract you've ever had.
Oh, I got chilled.
Feel the solid weight in your hand as you sign the loops of your first initial B. You feel the fluidity there, knowing that it's moving you to closure on a big moment in your life, right? So I could go on and on and on, but you get the point that it's not selling the features. It's always selling the experience that someone's going to have with it. Because if you're selling only the features, you're creating a ton of uncertainty gaps, communication gaps that you're going to have to fill. Right? So if you don't know what a 0.5 millimeter tip is, you may be looking at the closest pen and being like, I wonder what millimeter tip this is. You're going to have any frame of reference for it, but I can tell you how you're going to feel using this heavily weighted thing, because for a situation as heavy and wonderful that you've worked so hard to build, shouldn't what you're holding in your hand to commemorate that occasion feel just as worthy? And you go into that. It's really talking about how you're going to fill in the gap of someone's experience with what you're selling, with how you're serving, whether it's a product, service, it doesn't matter. Whether you're a leader and you're trying to get your team to buy into something, people, it's health insurance enrollment time, right? Heaven forbid.
Let's not go that way.
Right? Let's not talk about that. But it's, if you're changing company policy over something like that, how are you getting buy-in? Well, you have to get buy-in by first attacking any uncertainty gaps that cause fear, because when we are thinking in emotional terms, our brains are physiologically in a different processing part of our brain that will not help us make an educated decision. So we have to focus on those gaps.
That is the perfect example that you just gave with the pen, right? I mean, I got chills, right? You just imagine, and the power of even words, the power of saying, imagine, right? That immediately puts somebody in a different place in their head. They're picturing something. It's like telling them a story. We've been, since we were little kids, and somebody said, once upon a time. It's incredibly powerful. And for those of you joining us live or watching on replay, if there was noise, I think my upstairs neighbor was vacuuming. That's what happens when you go live. Things happen. I think that's so powerful, though, the experience, the emotion, right? So I know a million people say that we buy emotionally but rationalize. I forget the exact saying, but I think people get the point that we think we make decisions because of data, and we make decisions
because of a feeling. It's a combined thing, right? And different people have different ratios of that go into their decision making. But if I zoom out on it from a neuroscience, not even 101, like 0.101 level, right? Because I'm not going to claim to be this neuroscience expert, because I haven't spent 10 to 20 years of my life studying the brain. And there's a lot of people saying, like, I'm an expert in neuroscience. I'm like, really? Have you performed surgery? Have you been looking at thousands of brain scans? I don't understand it. But, let's just zoom out and simplify this as it pertains to someone making a decision about a product, right? 3 kind of areas of the brain that we look at, like our basal ganglia. It's kind of like, I look at it as like, let's put it in the center of the brain, right? This is like the habit center. I call it the status quo center. Status quo is when we're taking in information, when our eyes are glazing over a PowerPoint and reading bullet points, we're in status quo mode. We're like information, 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 information. The challenge is you need to get people to care about that information enough to shift their thinking forward into the prefrontal cortex or that other region of the brain. And there's many other parts that go along with it. Again, this is neuroscience 0.101. Where that's where cognitive functioning is occurring. It's a completely different area of the brain. So your transmitters need to fire and move and kind of pivot into that area. We can move people into that area in a number of different ways. If we evoke a little bit of emotion or some imagination or some curiosity, we start thinking about that. But if we're inundating someone with questions and uncertainties, they're kind of going to move back to that reptilian amygdala, fight or flight, that type of thing, where you're not processing in a rational way. So it's a combination of curious emotions or willingness to have those emotions. Like you were willing to imagine yourself in that situation. Right? You've probably also been to an event where you had a salesperson or a trainer or a speaker is like, okay, everybody close your eyes and imagine yourself in this world. And they haven't built up the trust with you to close your eyes and really play along with that, right? So once someone has built up that trust, you can use those imagination things as transitions to move the thoughts from one part of a brain to the other and get different areas firing in a way that's going to have them processing your words and messages in a fundamentally different way. Because I can make the most grammatically accurate, all I's dotted, T's crossed, beautiful, most eloquent, where every computer algorithm in the world says you nailed this on persuasive effectiveness. But if someone's brain is kind of like stuck in the center and they're not willing to move it forward to process a little bit, it's not going to have the same impact. So before we're delivering this beautiful articulation that we've spent months, if not years creating, it's, are we making sure that they're in the right mental and cognitive state to be able to take in what we're about to say and process it actively, so there are no gaps present? Because when there are those gaps, that processing doesn't happen.
Wow. Yeah. And I can't believe it. It's already 12:27. I don't know where this conversation has gone. I think it's time for some key takeaways.
I love that screen. That's great.
I have my little graphics that I can click on. So you've shared a lot with people. What if they want to communicate more effectively and be more strategic? What would you say top 2 things that they can do?
Number one, I would say do the communication gap analysis audit, like your touch points, your gap analysis, that type of thing. And if that's something you may not be comfortable doing on your own, or you honestly don't prioritize it enough to devote the time to it, and that's fine. I'm not judging that prioritization. That's yours and yours alone. The bigger, more tactical, immediate thing that you can do is stop wasting your most valuable real estate. And what do I mean by that? How many emails start with the phrase where, let's be honest now, the majority of us first see our emails as either pop-ups on the corner of a computer screen where we see the first line, or the preview where we see it on our phone, like the ones I have there now. And you know what that first line says?
Dear Jill,
I hope you're doing well. Nowhere in the history of emails have I ever read that first line as like, oh my gosh, I feel so incredibly amazing. Beth really hopes I'm doing well. Oh, this is the best thing ever. No, that's not reality. We have been brought up in a society where this politeness is important. The reality is that politeness is standing in the way of getting to your objective faster, to getting to the point of the message. So really focusing on what is that first line of the email that's going to have someone click on it and interrupt whatever they're doing on their phone or on their computer and move away from whatever they're doing to read your email first and make it a priority. I will tell you, every time I get a message with, I hope you're doing well, or I hope this message finds you well, it is one that goes unread for quite a while, simply because, no, if you hoped I was doing well, you would have respected and appreciated my time more. I mean, that's my perspective, right?
Right.
And I actually presented this to a workshop where a woman said, well, I actually hope they're doing well. And I said, I'm not saying that you don't. I'm saying that if you're going to use something like that, make sure that it's specific to the person. Beth, I hope your LinkedIn Live the other week with Jess Toddfeld was a raving success. right? At least then it's customized. So just be cognizant of the first words that are coming out of your mouth. It's the same thing when you're speaking on stage and it's like, ladies and gentlemen, or so I'm really happy to be here. Like, snooze fest. That's not important. You're not setting the stage, because those first words out of your mouth will determine where someone's mind is going to be starting in their position along that kind of pendulum, to be able to orient their thoughts afterwards and orient everything you say afterwards. So get to the point faster. If you're going to have a platitude of some sort, I'm not saying not be polite, but be specific about what it is, so someone actually recognizes that you recognize the relationship's importance.
My favorite is when automated emails go wrong. Dear first name. And I'm not saying, right, I use an email system like everyone else. And I actually attended a webinar from someone I knew. And then the email I got was worded as if they didn't know me. And where, right? And it's a lot of work not to do that, right? You have to tag people if you really know them. And I understand that. And I'm sure I've probably done the same, but it's really powerful.
It's the same as I got an email on my birthday. My birthday was last week, and I get an email saying happy birthday from this person that is sent from his executive assistant with a generic GIF graphic. Like, not only did you not waste your time in sending that, you actually made me distrust you completely by doing that, right? I mean, in this case, I didn't even need to read the first line of the email to know that this person in my network, or whoever his network may be. I mean, imagine I was $100,000 client and I got this automated email from his assistant to tell me happy birthday. No, thank you. Moving on.
Well, Jill, it is 12:30, and happy birthday again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for, I mean, this conversation could go on and on and on, of course. So anybody who's watching live or watching on replay, if you think about things after the fact and you want to put a comment or a question for Jill to answer going forward, I'll make sure she sees it. Thank you so much for joining me. This has been so much fun. And everybody, thanks for joining. Any last thoughts? Anything that you want to promote that's coming up that people should know about?
No, I mean, if you want to find me, if you're interested, you can Google my name. I'm everywhere, or at Dynamic Jill everywhere on social. Don't need to promote anything, just here to serve you and your audience, Beth. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, everybody.